In the first part of this video, I'll be describing the inner experience of a skip step, or what it's like to live with unhealed trauma or guilt. In the second part, I'll show how to identify skip steps in a birth chart. Skip steps in a birth chart reveal blockages to growth and healing that originated in a past life and are still occurring in the present life. These blockages happen through guilt or trauma, both of which can result in us becoming developmentally frozen in time. When we are unable to grow, we feel limited and boxed in. When we live with unhealed trauma, our life is focused on survival instead of things like self-expression, fulfillment, and achievement. When we are traumatized, we can't become more than we already are, and sadly, we often become less than we were before the trauma. When we incarnate, we bring the identity from our past life with us into the current life. This past life identity that follows us into the current life is called the South Node. Throughout our life, we all have experiences that alter that identity, ones that serve to transform, refine, and balance it. This change in how we view ourselves in the world, or the person we become because of our life experiences, is called the North Node. This is a process that happens to every soul that incarnates. In some people, this change will be noticeable. It will be more external and thus visible to others. For others, the way they change as people takes place internally and is therefore harder to see from outside observation alone. The fact that we all change as people throughout our life is a truth and natural law that no one can deny or escape. All significant life experiences affect us in ways that serve to change or alter our current identity or sense of self. But what happens when the life experiences that serve to change us, to help us grow and learn, are traumatic? What is the difference between non-traumatic versus traumatic changes in identity? The difference is that with trauma, the new ways of viewing and experiencing the world, or the emerging self, are blocked from being integrated into the current self, the manifestation of which is internal conflict between two opposing shadow selves. With non-traumatic experiences, this blockage to integration does not occur. Let me give an example. Let's say someone has a current identity that is very philosophical and right-brain oriented. They are a person that is interested in life's big questions. Questions like, why are we here? And where do we go after we die? This type of person is likely to have a South Node in Sagittarius, the energy or archetype that rules this part of the human makeup. A person like this will be searching for answers to these questions and are therefore likely to get involved with people and organizations that claim to be able to answer them. Let's say this person gets involved in an organized religion and therefore begins experiencing unnatural or man-made guilt via that religion's belief system. The person will then begin displaying the shadow side of Sagittarius, things like fundamentalism, self-righteousness, and faith that is solely mental in nature. Now, the opposing energy of Sagittarius is Gemini, which means this person will have a North Node in that energy. What that means is that the transformational life experiences this person has will cause them to become more Geminian in nature. Over their life, they may become less interested in religion and turn instead to things like science to help them answer the big questions they want answers to. But because the unnatural guilt they still possess is unhealthy and therefore keeps them in their shadow, they may start exhibiting the shadow side of their emerging, changing self, or Gemini, which manifest in things like intellectual debates, fact hoarding, and security through the constant acquisition of knowledge. With the guilt acquired from religion, they go from shadow to shadow. That is a problem because Sagittarius and Gemini are in many ways diametrically opposed, but also deeply related. and at the shadow frequency of fear, opposites always engage in conflict. There is no way for them to get along or integrate. This conflict created via opposing forces is the inheritance of mankind, operating at the frequency of fear, an inheritance that is visible in the conflict between things like men and women, or the masculine and feminine inside each of us, regardless of how we identify or our sexual orientation. We experience this conflict via polar opposites when the consciousness residing in us is still caught up in dualism, also known as the matrix or Maya, which is embedded in the natural laws governing the earth plane. One of those natural laws is polarity or dualism. We see this natural law in operation in all of external reality, whether that be through the opposites of light and darkness, winter and summer, males and females, or life and death. What most people don't realize is that this law of polarity exists both internally and externally. What this means is that these opposites we see outside of us, in all of manifest creation, also exist inside of us. As parts or aspects of phenomenal reality, we are therefore not immune to the design of the Creator. As above, so below. As within, so without. When we incarnate, we have access to the 12 energies that rule our solar system. Our souls use a vast array of combinations of these 12 core energies to create and live out a life. These 12 energies, or Zodiac Signs, are the clay of human existence and experience. They determine what we can experience while in human form. Residing in the heavens above the earth, they are the parameters of reality for consciousness in the form of souls that incarnate on the earth plane. Put another way, we can only experience reality through these 12 archetypes while incarnate on earth, these energies being what literally give form to the human psyche. And because these energies govern our plane of existence, they too are bound by the Creator's law of polarity. What that translates into is 6 signs or energies, and 6 polar opposite signs or energies. Just as the progression of time causes things in our external reality to change and evolve, so too do we change and evolve internally with time. And it is the meeting of these opposites in a cyclical manner that causes time to progress, and thus change to occur. We too have this design of the Creator inside of us. This design of evolution via the integration of polarity is how and why we experience changes in identity. The cyclic progression of time that causes this evolution of self through opposing energies happens every 18.5 years during times called nodal returns in astrology. But getting back to my example, the unhealthy guilt acquired through religion becomes the source of the conflict within the individual. If this guilt were examined and healed instead of repressed, denied, or avoided, the individual could begin integrating these 2 opposing aspects of their self. They would move from the shadow expression of these energies into the healthy, conscious expression of each, thereby making integration possible. Via the Sagittarius aspect of their identity, they would become someone who realizes that beliefs or truths formed from the level of human mind are subjective truth, and therefore that all beliefs are valid. They would also become someone whose faith was alive in their body as intuitive knowing, instead of their faith only residing in their mind as knowledge. And from the Gemini aspect of their emerging self, they would become someone whose orientation to life switched from the acquisition of knowledge or facts to someone who navigates life from a space of perceptions, curiosity, and wonder. Once the person healed their guilt, they could now integrate these energies of Sagittarius and Gemini successfully, as energies worked with in a conscious fashion can be merged through love, versus remaining in conflict via fear, in this case, that fear taking the form of guilt. Skip steps happen when a person tries to avoid, deny, or repress the parts of their being or psyche that were affected by guilt or trauma, and skip ahead in the development of their self. But there are no shortcuts or free rides in life. Past life trauma or guilt follows us from lifetime to lifetime until we choose to heal it. When we carry this past life trauma in our soul, it can feel like we are stuck in a box with two opposing identities: the self that we knew prior to the trauma, and the self we became because of the trauma. We want to escape this box. We need to grow, have new experiences, and become more than we currently are. We want to be happy and experience all the love, beauty, and abundance that life has to offer. But we cannot. We go back and forth between these two different aspects of ourselves, hoping to find a way out of our internal prison cell that we missed or didn't see before. Attempting to avoid having to deal with the trauma or guilt directly, we try to find workarounds. Like a ping pong ball on an enclosed tennis table, we go back and forth between our two identities, the old identity and the newer emerging one. The soul can experience this lifetime after lifetime until finally the person realizes that there is no way out except through. Now I'd like to demonstrate how to identify past life trauma or a skip step in a birth chart. But before I move on to that demonstration, I want to say that a person can have past life trauma impacting them in the present life without having a skip step in their birth chart. This happens when the person dies soon after the past life traumatic event, which doesn't give them enough time to access the North Node or emerging identity in that life. People in this case may have no awareness of their emerging identity or North Node energies until their nodal returns, which occur around the ages of 18, 36, 54, and 72. It is during these nodal returns that they will experience the energies and identity they are meant to grow into, and work directly on the integration of that identity, nodal returns being windows of time where we have direct access to our North Node energies. Up until the first nodal return at age 18, those foreign and polar opposite energies to the current identity can remain hidden. One indicator of past life trauma that occurred shortly prior to death is a symbol and stressful, non-square aspect to the South Node. For those with skip steps, this is not the case. They are born with access to both sets of energies and self-concepts prior to the first nodal return at age 18, although these energies may remain largely unconscious until that time. Skip steps are indicated in the birth chart when one or more planets are squaring the nodes. In this chart, we can see that both the Moon and Uranus are in square aspect, or 90 degrees away from the nodes. The Moon is the ego or emotional body, and Uranus is the individuated self, or self that's been liberated from conditioning. Because these planets are the ones squaring the nodes, we see that these are the parts of the individual impacted by the trauma, the parts of their self they deny, repress, or avoid because they are too painful or terrifying to deal with. The trauma or guilt that caused the rejection and dysfunction in these specific parts of the individual are seen in the placement of Uranus, as well as planets in the 11th house or Aquarius. Any aspects made from Uranus or from planets in Aquarius or the 11th house to other planets or symbols within the birth chart give additional information about the nature of the trauma or guilt that is blocking the healing, growth, and integration of the affected parts of the psyche. Reintegration of these wounded parts needs to happen via a specific node or aspect of the identity. We can determine what part of the identity that is by imagining we are inside the chart and standing on the affected planet. Whatever node is to our left is the resolution node. In this chart here, if we stand on the Moon and look to our left, the aspect of the identity that the ego and emotions need to reintegrate through is the South Node, or the Aquarian part of their self. Conversely, if we pretend we are Uranus in the chart and we look to our left, the aspect of the self that the true, authentic self needs to reintegrate through is the Leonian part of their nature, or their North Node. What this translates into is the emotions and internal security of the individual, as represented by the moon, needing to be healed from the shadow aspect of Aquarius. This could be anything from emotional detachment to rebellion from or submission to authority figures. They will need to understand the origins of the past life trauma, as well as face and work through it in order to heal this shadow aspect of self. The same process would need to be engaged in for the other skipped step, or Uranus. What a trauma signature such as this could boil down to is the need to find emotional security through their true authentic self, a liberated self that can then heal through creative self-expression. The information in this video can aid in the healing and integration of self or ego, as well as ego and soul. Lack of awareness of objective truth, or what some would call God's reality, keeps us trapped in the illusion of separateness. When we finally see and accept that as a part of nature, we are bound by and operate according to the same rules that govern the rest of creation, we learn humility, surrender, compassion, and detachment. Realizing that we are not gods, but instead are children of God that are bound by this Creator's will, or realizing that we only possess limited free will or choice within a preordained design or fate, we awaken. The Creator's will, which I call objective truth or natural law, is something we can all become aware of through the occult sciences. Like Adam and Eve, once we eat the fruit of occult knowledge, we are gifted with death of the self that perceives itself as separate from everything else. Witnessing objective reality for the first time, we are freed from the innocence, naivety, and non-awareness of spiritual blindness. Seeing who and what we really are, consciousness in the sacred forms of mind and body, we are liberated from sleep and awaken out of the fear-based fog of aloneness and into the love-based reality of trust and unity, or the reality of God. In closing, I want to reiterate that all aspects of our triune self, or our soul, body, and mind, are sacred and to be honored. Awakening doesn't have to be traumatic when we understand this truth, and can lovingly integrate these seemingly opposing aspects of self into a single self-concept. When we realize that we are more than just our mind and body, or ego, that can be a traumatic experience, especially if we have suppressed, denied, or avoided any aspect of ourselves. When we are in conflict with our mind and body, believing that we must do away with our ego in order to be free of suffering, the experience of awakening and how it serves to alter our sense of self and reality can be traumatic. Alternatively, when we deny, suppress, or avoid the existence of our soul or spirit, such as in the case with atheism, an awakening experience can be equally traumatic. To heal spiritual trauma such as this requires the reintegration of the fragments or parts of self lost through suppression, denial, and avoidance. Whether the experiences that serve to change our identity and view of life are ordinary or extraordinary, non-traumatic or traumatic, the ways that we are meant to grow and evolve from these experiences are always for our highest good. They are literal blessings in disguise. In the case of ego growth, we become better, more balanced versions of ourselves. And in the case of growth of our consciousness, we learn that there is a part of ourself that is immortal, that never dies, which allows us to live embodied lives free from the fear of death. When we can identify and focus on the positive ways our life experiences have changed us, while working through the loss or trauma experienced by our old self, this is when we can begin healing.